It was a bright, sunny day. The sky was clear and blue, without a single cloud. The sun was shining brightly and warmly, filling everything around with its radiance. The silence was broken by a large and strong lizard that attacked someone. However, the man turned out to be stronger, and with one precise blow of his dagger, he killed a huge reptile. It turned out to be Sena Rohill, a young girl with black hair flowing over her shoulders and eyes dark as night, who was pleased with her big catch. She was a D-rank hunter of the Adventurers Guild. Her partner, while collecting materials, admired Sena's fighting skills, who defeated D-rank monsters in an instant. The girl, in high spirits, picked up the bags of trophies and headed home. Due to her carelessness, the girl slipped and hit her head on the ground. At the moment of impact, memories of her past life returned to her. She remembered that she was a simple office worker and once fell asleep while reading a novel. Then she was woken up by another employee who told the heroine that the lunch break was already over and they were late for a meeting. Hearing this, Sena got up and followed her colleague. On the way, she thought that the story was too boring since the main character ran away, but decided to finish reading it after the conference. The memories ended abruptly as she woke up as Sena Rohill. Opening her eyes in an unfamiliar environment, the girl panicked. She did not understand what kind of memories they were and where the boundaries of reality were. The concerned doctor helped the girl get up, and at the same time collecting her thoughts in a heap, the heroine realized that she had been reborn in a book that she had read in a previous life. However, to her great regret, she could not remember the whole story, but only remembered the first episodes. Noticing the girl's confusion, the doctors explained to her that she had hit her head very hard, but fortunately she was not seriously injured. The doctor suggested that injuries were common among hunters. Hearing these words, Sena suddenly remembered that usually, hunters who moved into such works acquire unusual powers and skills. Realizing this, the girl tried to call up the status screen. From the outside, it looked extremely strange. Stunned, the doctor asked the heroine why he shouted these words. Seeing the patient's abnormal behavior, the doctor decided that this was a consequence of a head blow and gave the command to the nurses to quickly register the girl and immediately prepare her for surgery. Shocked by the situation, Sena swore she was fine. Leaving the hospital, the girl sighed in disappointment, since she had to spend all her earnings on the hospital bill, and now she did not know how she would pay for food this month. At the same time, she still had a hard time believing that she was in a fantasy world. Analyzing her life, she did not understand why she worked so hard in her past life and what her role was in this story. Sena assumed that she was not the main character, but also did not know if she was a secondary character. To begin with, the girl decided to remember whether there was a hunter character in that book. Also, oddly enough, she remembered the name of the book but was not sure about the plot. The girl also could not remember the name of the main character. Not far from Sena stood a young girl with long golden hair holding a flower bouquet in her hands. Having heard a guy passing by call this girl the name Ellen, she remembered that the main character of the story had the same name. Suddenly, a young man, without a drop of embarrassment, confessed his love to Ellen right in the middle of the street. Sena was surprised to realize that her neighbor had the same name as the main character of the book. Suddenly, a description of the main character of that story surfaced in her memory, namely the line that she was a young girl, the owner of a flower shop named Helen Eccles, whom they declare their love for every day. Sena was stunned to realize that all this time she had been living next door to the protagonist. However, having made sure that she had nevertheless moved to the novel, now the girl could not understand why, in this case, she did not have a status screen. All her hopes were shattered, as it turned out that in this story she was just an ordinary neighbor. At this time, an embarrassed young guy asked Ellen to date him. The guy's words confused the girl, but she refused with a reddened face. While the confused couple was in their little world, Sena was shrouded in a gloomy aura. She was extremely unhappy with her role in this universe. So, a month passed from the moment Sena's memories returned. During this time, she remembered something about the original work. The story revolved around the search for the main male character. Therefore, Ellen had to listen to declarations of love every day, which the girl politely refused. And every time these insignificant characters left in tears. While Sena was watching Ellen, she noticed that every day only one man confessed his feelings for Ellen. Based on this, The girl assumed that at this rate, it would take forever to find the main character. While Sena was thinking that the confession scene had already ended for today, suddenly a gust of wind became stronger. It hit the girl's face, causing her hair to fly in different directions. While the irritated girl was straightening her tousled hair, a guy with silver hair walked past her. The girl was very surprised when the young man called Helen. Hearing a familiar voice, Ellen turned around with a smile. When the girl asked if he had come to buy flowers, Dion answered in the negative, saying that he wanted to say something important. Plucking up courage, the guy confessed his feelings. Ellen was stunned by these words. Without waiting for an answer, Dion ended his confession with a request to marry him. Sena was also shocked by this confession, since Helen had already been confessed that day. At that moment, the boring rule that had been followed throughout the month was broken. It was amazing and strange, and the reason for this was a guy who didn't look like an insignificant character at all. Shocked, Sena stood motionless, her eyes wide and her mouth slightly open. She couldn't believe her eyes and ears. The excited guy proposed marriage to Ellen. He promised to give her happiness. However, the girl's heart was not touched by these words. She immediately refused. Dion asked for the reason for his answer. Then Ellen justified her refusal by the fact that they had known each other for only a month. Only after hearing these words, Dion realized that only a month had passed since their first meeting. However, his feelings were not limited to these times. Sena considered this scene too banal. Sitting on a bench, the heroine watched the couple and was disappointed by the fact that although the rule was broken, the result remained the same. Looking at them, she wondered whether events would continue to develop as usual. If everything happens this way, then first, Ellen will turn around and go to the flower shop, after which the man will throw himself on his knees. When everything happened exactly as she expected, she became completely bored. However, given that the rules were still broken, she rated Dion's confession 80 points. After the performance ended, Sena decided to return home. However, the devastated guy was still sitting on the cold ground. The girl didn't know how to react to this. Dion was in the same condition as the others. Every man who confessed his feelings to Helen in front of Sena's house, having received a refusal, immediately fell into despair. Therefore, the girl was not surprised by this scene. However, Dion's condition lasted longer than that of the other candidates. The guy continued to call Ellen, crying. Looking at Dion's face, Sena noticed that his face stood out among the others. The guy continued to shed tears continuously. Watching this, Sena realized that he was truly heartbroken. She decided to sit on the bench for a while longer to give the guy time to calm down. Evening slowly fell over the city as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant shades of red, orange, and purple. The sky gradually darkened and stars appeared on it. It began to rain, and the first drops fell to the ground. Gradually, the rain intensified, and within a few minutes, there was a heavy downpour. Then Sena decided to remind Dion that he was sitting on her doorstep and ask her to clear the way. The guy, all wet, looked at the stranger with tears in his eyes. Seeing the guy's silver hair and blue eyes up close, the girl drowned in his beauty. However, she suddenly remembered conversations in society about a man with the same physical characteristics, whose name was Dion Fravel. Hearing his name from the lips of an unknown girl, the guy asked if she knew him. Avoiding answering, she asked a counter question about what such an important person was doing on her doorstep. Standing in front of the guy, she remembered the first time she heard this man's name. Then the other hunters told her that Dion was the eldest son of the head of their guild. Talking about him, the girls were extremely inspired and vying with each other to praise his appearance. It was from them that Sena learned that the eldest son of the Fravel family, who falls in love at first sight, has silver hair and blue eyes. At that time, the heroine did not believe these rumors. However, his friends insisted that the rumors were true and told even more stories about him, which said that the head did not allow him to join the guild because he had a terrible character. After hearing these stories, Sena assumed that Dion was a hot-headed jerk. She also added that she would like to meet him someday. And now, in a stupor, she looked at the man about whom there were so many rumors. Now the infamous son of her boss sat in front of the door to her house. Sena could not ignore him, since he was the son of the head of the guild where she works. Then she decided to lure him to her side in order to regain her C rank. Seeing the thoughtful look of the stranger, Dion stood up and asked if she wanted to tell him something. To please her boss's son, she apologized for the long pause with a forced smile. And with the same smile, she said that the whole point was that the guy was standing in front of her house. Speaking of this, she pointed her finger towards her doors. Turning around, he saw the doors to the house. He hastily asked for a petition and cleared the way. Sena accepted the apology with a smile and invited the guy into the house to shelter from the rain. Dion was surprised by the stranger's behavior. The guy agreed with a smile and thanked him. When she came home, the girl invited him to sit down and lent him some towels. While the guy was waiting on the sofa, the girl brought hot tea. At this time, Dion wiped his face and hair with a towel. For Sena, this scene was truly beautiful. Such beauty took the girl's breath away. The guy gratefully took the cup. The girl put the tray on the table and thought that most likely her house looked too shabby for the guy. Taking her tea, the girl sat down on the sofa next to the guy. And looking at him, she thought that he did not at all look like a person with a disgusting character. He didn't look like the bad guy from the rumors at all. And yet she couldn't remember the guy with silver hair and blue eyes in the illustrations for the novel. Based on this, Sena assumed that Dion was a minor character. This means that he is nothing more than one of many who will ultimately fail to win the heart of the main character. While drinking tea, she continued to think that even the son of the head of the guild is powerless before the plot of the book. The man was the first to break the silence. He once again thanked the girl for her help. The guy knew that the girl in the yard saw everything, but Sena pretended that he didn't understand what he was talking about. However, realizing that there was no point in denying, the embarrassed girl awkwardly replied that she didn't want to disturb them and that she shouldn't worry about it. But the guy wanted to talk, so he asked Sena to listen to his story until the rain stopped. The heroine did not consider this something difficult, so she agreed. Hearing the answer, Dion thanked him and began his story. The girl was very surprised to hear that Helen was Dion's childhood friend, as well as his first love. The reason for this was Helen's words that she and Dion had known each other for only a month. Then the guy clarified that Helen has reasons to think so. After all, she erased all her memories, including especially warm and bright moments spent with him when they came up with new games, participated in various adventures, and played pranks. And the motive for such a categorical decision was Helen's painful past, which haunted her. Ellen Evans is the main character of the world where Sena lives. Due to the fact that she is the illegitimate child of Marquis Achilles, she was bullied by everyone while she was growing up. Eventually, she decided to run away from home. However, she could not forget her painful past, so she sought out the witch and erased all her memories. Hearing this, Sena remembered that this was written in the backstory of the book he read in his previous life. Once, when Dion was younger, he went to a ball and was completely alone. The guy continued his story, and Ellen was the only person who approached him then. Since then, Dion could not forget her warm smile and gentle hands. At that time, he could not even imagine that such a kind girl suffered so much, and upon learning that she erased her memories and ran away, the guy searched every corner of the capital to find her. And even the fact that she didn't remember him didn't matter. Then, having found her, Dion was confident that he could protect her and wanted to start all over again. But time passed, and more men came to confess to her, and this not counting the suspicious man who had been following her some time ago. Slightly agitated, Sena looked questioningly at her interlocutor. Then Dion clarified that the man looked like an ordinary visitor, but clearly had a noble origin. Hearing about this, the girl suggested that perhaps Ellen's family had sent that person, and asked what the guy thought about this. Then Dion replied that he also accepted this possibility, since the people of the House of Euclid were also looking for her. But he was concerned by the fact that at the moment there was no relationship between him and Helen, and therefore, if necessary, the guy would not be able to help her. Hearing these words, Sena realized that this was precisely the reason for the sudden marriage proposal, and thus Dion wanted to become a person close to Helen. In response, the guy simply nodded silently, thereby confirming the heroine's guesses. Having finished his story, Dion noticed that the rain had already stopped and hastily said goodbye to the door. In parting, Sena tried to console the guy at least a little so that he would not be so depressed. She spoke words of encouragement with a smile. Finally, Dion smiled for the first time in all this time and, thanking the girl again, left. Only after her boss's son left, the girl was able to relax a little. The day was too tiring for her. Having seen off the guest, Sena decided to take a shower and go to bed. Suddenly, the girl realized that when leaving, Dion called her by name. However, Sena clearly remembered that she did not say her name. Morning came in the city. The streets slowly woke up, filled with the noise of carriages and the voices of people. The heroine woke up from a terrible rumble. Due to lack of sleep, the girl flew into a rage, but still she had to get up. The angry girl went to check what was happening on the street. The door suddenly opened and hit the man who was standing behind it. The girl herself was frightened by the sudden blow and asked if the stranger was okay. The unknown person greeted Sena and asked for forgiveness for standing in front of her door. Seeing the child in front of her, the heroine relaxed a little and asked about the reasons for the noise, and also about knights from a fancy carriage. Sena assumed that they had come to arrest someone. However, the stranger refuted this guess and said that they were here because of the lady who owned the flower shop, since their master wanted to make her his personal gardener. The heroine couldn't understand why a noble man would want to hire an ordinary flower shop owner from a small town. Then she thought that perhaps this was the suspicious man Dion was talking about. Tired of constant thoughts, Sena decided that it was time to put an end to these thoughts because they were of no use. Having learned about the reasons for the noise, she said goodbye and hurried home. However, before she could close the door, a man pushed her away and burst into her home. Sena decided that the gentleman had simply mixed up the houses and warned that he had the wrong door and that the flower shop was nearby, but the man did not seem to listen to her. Realizing that the stranger was not going to leave, the girl asked why he was breaking into her house, while at the same time, the inspired knight asked his master if he had managed to make a deal with the owner of the flower shop. Without even listening to his subordinate's question, the man sharply answered that Ellie had refused him and headed deeper into the house, looking around. Suddenly, he stopped and, turning around, said in an orderly tone that he wanted to buy Sena's house. While the girl stood in a stupor, he arrogantly ordered her to name the price. The stunned girl did not understand how she should react. Noticing the girl's confusion, a man with hair as black as night and eyes as scarlet as rubies decided to introduce himself in order to show his greatness. Hearing the name Rashid Karlman, Sena realized that the Duke was standing in front of her. The man, with a satisfied look, confirmed his status and again asked the question about how much he needed to pay to buy this house. But the girl did not understand why the Duke needed such an old house if he already had an estate. However, even before receiving an answer, I myself understood the reason. There weren't many options. Most likely, this was his plan to get closer to Helen. Such an act was too dubious even for a high-ranking nobleman. Without waiting for an answer from Sena, Rashid himself began to offer his own options based on the average cost of houses of this type. But the heroine did not let him finish and flatly refused to sell. Neither the Duke nor his assistant expected such an answer. The faithful knight could not tolerate such impudent behavior towards his master and began to blame the girl for violating etiquette, but Sena did not consider these words fair. Then the man moved from words to actions and drew his sword, but the D-rank hunter easily dodged the blow. She was not going to tolerate such attitude towards herself, so she warned that at the next attack, she would not stand like a pillar and would fight back. To avoid a battle, the Duke gave orders to the knight to stop. At this moment, another knight who was standing near the door received another blow to the back of his head. Trying to enter the house, Dion accidentally touched the guy by opening the door. Dion apologized to him and greeted Sena with a charming smile. The girl was not expecting guests, so she asked in surprise what he was doing here. And the Duke obviously knew the guy and was not happy with him. Sena was pleased to learn that the two knew each other. Of course, Dion was not happy about this meeting either. Rashid explained his presence by saying that he had come to buy this house. Then Sena, with a smile on duty, said that this was impossible since he was the one who was going to buy it. This information once again shocked the girl. Not paying attention to the hostess of the house, the uninvited guests continued to argue about which of them would ultimately get the house and who could pay more for it. After some time, Sena's patience ran out. She screamed at the top of her voice that the guys would shut up. The angry girl repeated once again that the house was not for sale. Even experienced knights were afraid of the hunter's evil face. The girl suddenly had a headache. Finally, the Duke realized that at the moment there was no point in trying to negotiate the purchase of the house. In order not to waste his time in vain, he and his people left Sena's household. The heroine was pleased with this, but she also realized that Rashid would return. Dion thought the same. After the Duke left, the boss's son said that he wanted to ask something, but before he could ask his question, the girl suddenly fell. Luckily, the guy managed to catch her and she didn't hit the floor. Seina's head hurt terribly from all these nerves. The guy immediately called a doctor. After checking the patient, the doctor concluded that it was a common cold and that after a little rest, she would feel better. The girl was surprised, since she had never been sick before, but the doctor said that there was nothing strange in this. Anyone can get sick one day. Since Seina was in the hospital a few days ago before leaving, the doctor asked the man to take care of his wife, which stunned the unmarried couple. Before they even had time to clear up the misunderstanding, the doctor had already left the house, either from the heat or from embarrassment. Seina's face turned red as a tomato. After the doctor's words, the guy also fell out of reality. Seina sat down on the sofa and sincerely thanked her for the help and for calling the doctor. Dion explained his sudden appearance by saying that he had come to see Ellen, but then he heard a noise and decided to check what was happening here. Then the girl joyfully replied that she was glad that the guy showed up on time. But the guy apologized because he felt guilty that because of him, the girl got wet in the rain, and most likely because of this, she caught a cold. Seina was touched by Dion's concern, and the young man's guilty pug completely amazed the girl on the spot. In response, Seina said that she did not blame Dion for this, but on the contrary, she was grateful to him for helping to get rid of Duke Carlman. Hearing this, Dion hastily explained that he himself did not intend to buy this house, but simply wanted to help Seina. The girl felt relieved because then she was really surprised. Dion was glad that he could help. Having finished the conversation, the guy asked the heroine to go back to bed, and while she was recovering, he promised to look after the house, which greatly surprised the girl, since she was sure that Dion was going to the neighbor. But the guy replied that it was not that important and he would go there another time. Dion urgently asked the girl to get a good night's sleep and rest. Having heard that Seina wanted to ask something at the next meeting, the guy happily agreed to answer any question. Sitting back, the girl said that on the first day of their meeting, Dion called her by name. However, she was sure that she herself did not say her name. Then, making an extremely surprised face, the guy replied that the girl herself told him. But the girl was sure of the opposite. Then Dion, with a confident voice, recalled that on the day of their first meeting, Seina introduced herself. Hearing this, the girl was shocked, since she did not remember this, but the guy was surprised to ask whether she had really forgotten. Dion's words sounded true, so the girl doubted her memory. Moreover, the guy had no reason to lie about such a thing. Suddenly, Seina remembered something else, namely their past conversation about a suspicious man, and I decided to find out if that man was Duke Carlman. Hearing a negative answer, she was extremely dumbfounded, since she was almost sure that it was Rashid. Dion then explained that the man also had dark hair, but it was longer and seemed to be purple in color. After she heard this, she was completely convinced that the pursuer was not the Duke. Then they began to think together about who that stalker was. Suddenly, the girl realized that she was in no condition to worry about her neighbor right now. She should worry about herself first, because Duke Carlman said he would return. Then she firmly said that the next time the Duke talks about buying a house, she will fight back. Dion asked how exactly. Then the girl began to think about possible options, and the first thing that came to her mind was to beat Rashid. And realizing that she would then be arrested, she decided to do it when there were no witnesses. What she heard shocked Diona, and a moment later his face lit up with a radiant smile, and he answered with a laugh that the idea was not a bad one. A few hours later, having made sure that everything was fine with the girl, the guy asked around and left. It was already evening outside and the sky was painted in bright sunset colors. Making sure that Seina had closed the door, Dion turned away and left. While he was walking, he thought that technically he had not lied to the girl, saying that she had told her name at the first meeting. At this time, Ellen was working on flowers in her store. Looking at the delicate flowers, she thought about Duke Carlman. At first, seeing the aristocrat surrounded by knights, she was afraid. However, the beauty and gentle tone of the guy he asked to become his gardener won her over. He looked at her as a specialist, not a girl. Ellen was glad that such a high-ranking person appreciated her skills, but she believed that she was not suitable for the role of gardener on his lordship's estate. For this reason, I was forced to refuse the Duke. She told her friend about this during a tea party. After listening carefully to the girl, the mysterious friend suggested that perhaps this man really loved Ellen. At these words, the girl's eyes dropped slightly. Her gaze was directed downwards. Her cheeks became bright pink from the rush of blood, and her lips were slightly pursed. The embarrassed girl did not believe that this was possible, but it gave her butterflies in her stomach. While Ellen was lost in her amorous thoughts, Sena noticed her and came over to say hello. Sena said that she would like to buy some white flowers. Ellen ran up to her neighbor in high spirits. It was impossible not to notice the girl's glowing face, so Sena decided to ask the reason for such happiness. Helen enthusiastically shared her joy with her neighbor, saying that yesterday a man of noble birth came to her and asked her to become his gardener. Raina reeked of misunderstanding, not understanding the reason for such admiration. Then the girl added that this was the first time that someone paid attention to her skills, and not to her appearance. Sena immediately understood who she was talking about, and was unpleasantly surprised by this fact, since she did not expect such a reaction, and did not think that her neighbor might develop feelings for the Duke. However, Ellen, with a slightly upset voice, finished her story, saying that she had to refuse because she was not sure that she could cope with such a responsible job. Suddenly, she remembered that Sena had come to buy flowers, and she ran to the shop to choose white flowers. Looking at the variety of light colors, Ellen thought about which ones to choose. Sena did not have the best opinion of the Duke, so she was worried that he might still return and persuade Ellen, especially since the neighbor was already half conquered by him. At the same time, Sena was on Dion's side and did not want to see him upset again. For this reason, she decided to intervene in this story. Sena put on all her acting skills and said with a depressed look that something had happened that was really bothering her. Hearing about this, as expected, the good-natured Ellen asked what had happened. Continuing her game, Sena pretended that she didn't know whether she should tell her neighbor about this, but she didn't have to persuade for long. She leaned over to Ellen and began to whisper in her ear with an insidious voice, saying that yesterday someone broke into her house. Moving a little further, she clarified that it was Duke Carlman with his people. Then she told in full color, with a little exaggeration, how the terrible Duke demanded that she sell him her house. Hearing how aggressive Rashid acted and that he even threatened Sena, Ellen turned pale with fear. Then the girl with a benevolent smile took Ellen's hand and said in a worried voice that she could take care of herself, so there was no need to worry. However, she herself is worried about her neighbor because she believes that his lordship needs the houses of this area, and it also seems to her that the Duke likes to torment those who refused him. The naive girl took all Sena's words at face value and was horrified, not understanding how a man could do such a thing. Now all the Duke's actions and words seemed suspicious. Ellen realized with horror that all the Duke's actions were just a ploy to get her house. After her colorful story, Sena watched her neighbor's reaction. Ellen was completely disappointed by the Duke's treachery. Then Sena continued to add fuel to the fire. She said with a sympathetic tone that since she was a hunter herself, she managed to keep the land, but Ellen was more vulnerable. She advised her to be careful and try not to get involved with him. At the end of the conversation, she insistently asked to simply ignore the Duke completely. Ellen, horrified after everything she heard, agreed with her neighbor, and thanking her, said that she would be careful of him in the future. Having heard such welcome words from Ellen and being pleased with her reaction, Sena replied with a friendly smile that there was no need for thanks, since that is what neighbors are for. Having completely destroyed the image of Duke Carlman, the heroine was proud of herself. The next day, she enthusiastically told Dion about it. Hearing the girl's story, he was surprised and decided to check with her again whether this meant that she deliberately put the Duke in a bad light in front of Ellen. But Sena sharply replied that this was not so. She explained that it was a normal conversation between neighbors, and Ellen, because of her upbringing, perceived everything that way. She also added that everything she said was based on irrefutable facts. Then Dion asked what she would do if the Duke found out about this. But Sena didn't even listen to him. Noticing that Ellen had left the house, she was inspired and with a bright smile, sparkling eyes and slightly pink cheeks told Dion to at least go greet her. But before she could finish speaking, the neighbor came back in. Then, in order to console the seemingly upset Dion, Sena said that next time everything would work out, but the guy only felt awkward. Sena interpreted such a confused expression on her face as depression due to a previously received refusal. She smiled with all sincerity and promised to help him. Suddenly, Dion put his hand on the girl's forehead, and it turned out that she still had a fever, but she had not noticed. Dion, with a concerned voice, told her not to do that again, but the heroine did not understand what he was talking about. Then the guy clarified that he meant that Sena should not get in the way of the Duke just to help him. And, with a dazzling smile, Dion added that he decided to let Ellen go. While the girl was returning home, she continued to think about the words of her boss's son and did not understand how this was possible. After all, he said that he had been in love with Ellen all his life. She wondered how he could give up so easily and was worried that he would cry alone again. Sena remembered Dion's crying face when they first met. She was afraid that maybe even now he was crying somewhere. Continuing to plunge into her disturbing fantasies, she imagined how Dion, not noticing anything in front of him because of the flowing tears for his unrequited love, could encounter bandits, who, noticing his noble appearance, will want to rob the guy. But a cute and timid guy will not be able to fight back. Sena was horrified just imagining what could hypothetically happen. She immediately rushed towards the guy to catch up with him and make sure that everything was okay with him. Suddenly, she heard screams and immediately assumed that it could be Dion. Mentally kicking herself for leaving her friend alone in such a dangerous area, she ran towards the voices to help him. However, the one who was lying on the floor was not Dion. And the one who contributed to this was our good-natured Dion. His silver hair shimmered and glowed, as if it had absorbed all the moonlight. The girl decided to hide around the corner and watch what was happening, because she did not understand what was happening. The arrogant gentleman took out his anger on a gang of bandits who were unlucky enough to encounter him. Suddenly, the guy felt the presence of a stranger, and in an arrogant tone, ordered to stop hiding and come out, which greatly frightened Sena, as she thought that these words were directed at her. Dion's next phrase completely shocked her, since he said that the wall would not be able to hide the body of the observer, while the girl, although she considered herself rather large, was not large enough to deserve such words. While Sena was stunned and did not know what to do, a man came out from around another corner with his hands raised. His name was Turner, and it was to him that Dion had been addressing all this time. When asked by a friend why he had been hiding all this time, Turner told him that he looked too scary and asked a response question about whether the man on the floor was alive, to which Dion, with an ominous smile, replied that yes, since he was sure that he, the guy, can take care of that. Hearing these words, the street robbers, gathering all their strength, stood up and ran away in horror. Looking after them, Dion arrogantly said that he did not understand why they ran away, since they would die anyway, and Turner suddenly told him that his superiors had contacted him and asked whether Dion was really busy with the investigation. Then Dion lightly put his arm around his friend's shoulders and, pulling him towards him with a cold smile, asked if Turner was really going to report that he was idle, to which the frightened guy gave an instant negative answer. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a girl who looked like a teenager, dressed in a black cape that almost completely hid her face, and 2 brown pigtails peeked out from under the hood. She called the guys and they immediately followed her. From shock and fright, Sena staggered and, unable to stand on her legs that gave way from fear, collapsed to the ground. She was confused to learn that the bandit was the real Dion. At this time, Dion and his friends were walking somewhere. Suddenly, the girl turned to him and asked what happened, since in her opinion, the guy didn't look very good. Having received no answer, she asked again what he was worried about, since they had already tracked down Ellen. Dion finally responded, only saying that that wasn't the problem. Then, the girl with a grin suggested that it was because of Sena Rohill. The expression on his face was more eloquent than any answer. The girls immediately realized that these two had finally met. At this time, Sena was still trying to digest the information she had received. The next day, the heroine went to the guild, where, as always, it was full of people. While waiting her turn, she was still thinking about yesterday's events. After all, then, Dion was completely different from the Dion she was used to. In addition, having heard Turner's words, she still did not understand which authorities were being talked about. Since he is the son of the head, the girl assumed that he could very well be a secret agent of the guild or something like that. While the heroine was immersed in her thoughts, she did not notice how her turn came, and only when she heard the administrator's call, she came to her senses and ran up to the counter. The administrator joyfully greeted the hunter. Sena greeted him back and said that she was also glad to meet you. Assuming that the heroine had come for a new job, Anna hastily began to check the lists of orders, but the girl stopped her, saying that she had come to find out something. Having said this, Sena approached the curious administrator and asked in a quiet voice about Dion. Since he is the son of the head of the guild, Anna naturally knew about him, so Sena asked her to tell her everything she knew. The first thing the administrator thought was that he was a hot but crazy idiot. She went on to say that Dion is the son of the head's first wife, but it seems that the head's brothers and sisters have caused this wife a lot of trouble. The main reason for this attitude was her ignoble origin. As a result, she died quite early, and according to rumors, she died due to the fact that the relatives of the head mocked her. Little Dion probably thought the same as he began to take revenge on them. There are rumors that Dion stole the bride from the head's younger brother, Salon Fravel. According to the same stories, the engagement of the head's younger sister, Isabella Fravel, was also disrupted by Dion because he stole her fiancé. And it's because of these rumors that people think he's a crazy idiot. From what she heard, Sena was completely out of her mind. She did not understand whether they were even talking about the same person now. Anna summed up her story by saying that the heroine had better not mess with him. Hearing Sena's last words, she panicked because she didn't know that Anna would see through her so easily. But the administrator was quite smart and immediately realized that Sena would not have come all this way out of idle curiosity. So the conclusion suggested itself. She had encountered him somewhere. Anna did not extract details from her, only strongly advised her to stay away from him, since he is truly a dangerous person. Sena thanked her for the advice and said goodbye to Anna, finally asking her to let her know if there were any interesting orders. As usual, there were many hunters in the room, but one of them stood out in particular. Anna immediately noticed the newcomer and showed it to Sena. The girl, looking in the direction where the administrator was pointing, saw the Duke. The heroine did not expect to meet him here and tried with all her might to hide her face so that he would not notice her. She quickly said goodbye to Anna and ran to the exit to quickly leave. All this time, she continued to cover her face with her hair in order to somehow hide from the Duke. Because of this, she did not notice the person standing in front and accidentally crashed into him. Realizing the extent of her guilt, she immediately apologized. But the arrogant hunter was not in the mood for a polite conversation. Sena still did not want to attract unnecessary attention and tried to answer as politely as possible. But Marcel seemed to be deliberately trying to provoke her. However, it was more important for Sena to get out of here as quickly as possible, so she endured with all her might in order to quickly finish and run away. But this made the guys even more impudent, and each time their words became ruder. Not only did they mock her, but they also brought someone close to her into the conversation. The hunters spoke rudely about Sena and made fun of her father's death. She could no longer endure this, and with a sharp tone she said that her father was alive. Then Marcel laughed even louder, saying that this was impossible. But Sena did not listen to the next taunt, and with a terrifying smile asked why the guy starts talking to her every time they meet, since they are not even friends, emphasizing that this is very arrogant of Marcel. And finally, she decided to return all his insults to the guy, telling him to brush his teeth because his breath stinks, and that's why all the girls refuse him. This made the guy furious. Then Marcel was the first to show aggression and grabbed the girl by the breasts. He furiously shouted at her, ordering her to shut up. But Sena was calm. She continued to laugh arrogantly in the guy's face as she was confident in her abilities. Then Marcel lost control of himself and tried to hit her. Sena had no intention of dodging the attack, since everything was going exactly as she had planned. Because if the guy hit her first, then all her further strikes would be considered self-defense. But someone grabbed the guy's hand and stopped the attack. He arrogantly pointed out the injustice and cowardice of Marcel. The most surprising thing was that none other than Duke Carlman came to Sena's defense. The hunter became even more angry. He tried with all his might to free his hand and demanded to be let go. But Rashid indifferently ordered to stop leading himself like this, since he could barely hold it anyway. Having said this, he threw Marcel aside. The hunter fell flat on the floor. With his face distorted with anger, he furiously shouted that he would not let this get away with him. Rashid, with a malicious smile, answered Marcel that he was just a small fry. Sena watched all this in a stupor. Having finished the conversation with the hunter, the Duke immediately switched to gentleman mode and approached the girl and asked if she was all right. The heroine did not understand what was happening at all. With an awkward smile, she replied that she was fine and thanked her for her help, mentally mourning that her perfect self-defense plan had collapsed. At first, the Duke didn't believe it and wanted to ask again, but suddenly he realized that the mistress of that house was standing in front of him. While they were talking, Marcel gained strength and attacked Rashid from behind. Sena noticed this in time and managed to warn Duke Carlman. Thanks to this, he turned around in time and blocked the blow. Having stopped the attack, the Duke continued to comment on Marcel's actions. Every word he said provoked the guy even more. Eventually, the hunter drew his dagger. Noticing that he was about to attack the unarmed man with a knife, Sena could no longer stay away. She knocked the weapon from his hands with one clear kick. After this, the Duke knocked out the guy. From such a force of impact, Marcel flew several meters away. Sena was happy that this idiot grabbed it in time. Having learned about the fight, the knights in charge of security inside the guild ran up. Seeing the hunters lying on the floor, they decided to arrest those responsible for this. Thus, Sena ended up behind bars. The worst thing was that the guards ran up just when they were delivering the blows. If the girl had also been injured, they could have tried to negotiate. And also, due to the fact that the Duke was without security, he was not recognized and was locked up with the heroine. The girl, out of politeness, asked if the Duke was okay and offered to have a snack. However, he refused, saying that his assistant would come for him soon. Unexpectedly, he apologized to Senya for that incident, which greatly surprised her. He explained that he was sorry for breaking into her house without permission, and also promised to punish Garrett. Sena didn't know who it was, but based on the context, she realized that it was the knight who attacked her. Rashid explained that the knight was a lazy knight who never received proper training, and remained in his place only because his father was a loyal vassal of the Duke's family. The girl accepted the apology and said everything was fine. She was still in shock from what was happening. Sena believed that most nobles would react differently in such a situation, such as directing their anger at her, or they would continue to furiously shout at the guards to let them out. For example, she recalled the behavior of Marcel, whose family, although noble solely because of the title, but he behaves as if everything is allowed to him. Analyzing this whole situation, she came to the conclusion that the Duke was a strange person. 3 hours later, no one came for Rashid. The girl was extremely surprised by this. Then she suggested that the reasons for such a delay could be that something happened to the assistant. When asked by the Duke what exactly, she could not clearly answer. By doing this, she increased the man's mistrust and wariness. The atmosphere was extremely tense. Sena did not know what she should say in such a situation. Then she suggested that they come up with something, since they were in the same boat. The heroine's last phrase greatly surprised the Duke. Sena couldn't think of anything better than to tell the warden that the man next to her was of noble birth. But as expected, they did not believe her. Suddenly, someone's footsteps were heard, and the girl was delighted, thinking that it might be the Duke's assistant. But it was not him. The man said that he had come to Sena Rohill. However, neither the Duke nor the heroine knew who it was. The stranger introduced himself as the butler of the young master Marcel, and said that he had come on his behalf to request compensation in the amount of 1 million rupees. The girl was simply shocked by such a sum. The butler began to say that this amount took into account today's damage, as well as other damage that was caused earlier, adding that Sena's father killed the young master's teacher. The girl became furious at these words and, without allowing him to finish, corrected him, saying that it was nothing more than an accident during service. Hearing these words, the Duke also asked what it was about. As it turned out, Aliyah Asal, Marcel's teacher, was killed while carrying out an order from Sena's father, so the butler and the young master considered him to be the culprit in the teacher's death. However, Sena insisted that Asal agreed to the order as a hunter. But for the vile butler, this did not matter. He only wanted to receive huge compensation. Suddenly, with a malicious grin, he added that he had one more requirement. The condition was that if her comrade agreed to be tied up and beaten by Marcel, then there would be no need to pay, and if he kneeled right now, he could avoid 1 or 2 blows. At that moment, the Duke's assistant burst in. The girl immediately informed him that his lordship was locked in a wretched cell. The assistant immediately ran up to his master and began excitedly asking what happened and how. Seeing this, the butler and the warden realized that he was indeed a duke. Not missing an opportunity, Sena spoke in detail about Marcel's desire to beat the Duke. Hearing this, the butler turned pale with fear. and the observer retreated tactically. The man, in a panic, tried to come up with at least some worthwhile excuse, but the assistant was furious. After some time, they sat down at the negotiating table. The Duke called Aaron, and he immediately came up. The butler and the guard trembled with fear, awaiting their verdict. When the Duke asked what he asked, the assistant replied in one breath that the gentleman ordered not to look for him and not to disturb him when he decided to take a walk alone. But the Duke clarified that this was a different request. Then Aaron replied that he was almost done with this matter. However, he suggested first dealing with the vile types who dared to insult the Duke. The frightened elderly man, barely able to connect a few words, tried to greet the gentleman correctly, as required by etiquette. But Rashid interrupted him and said that he wanted to meet Marcel in person. The Duke, with an arrogant expression on his face, recalled everything that the butler himself had said and added that he wanted to personally check his condition. But the butler could not allow this to happen. Then Aaron asked about compensation. The man immediately replied that they had nothing to worry about. However, the assistant could not end everything so simply. He asked about his young master's desire to beat the Duke. Hearing this, the butler immediately began to deny everything and shifted all responsibility to Sena, saying that she alone must pay compensation. These he caused bewilderment and anger in the heroine. She did not agree with the charges and believed that she was not obligated to pay anything. Suddenly, the Duke interrupted their argument, saying that he would pay on behalf of Sena. The girl looked at the Duke and did not understand what he was trying to achieve. The butler wanted to get money from the heroine. However, seeing the Duke's gaze, he did not dare to object and agreed to accept the money from him. But Sena did not agree with this. The Duke was the last person she wanted to be indebted to. She already imagined how Rashid would force her to sell the house in exchange for the debt. And she resolutely said that she would never borrow from him. Moreover, she did not agree with such a sum. So, in an orderly tone, she asked the butler to introduce her to Marcel so that she could see with her own eyes what condition he was in. She did not accept refusals from the butler and said that if he did not agree, then she herself would go to Marcel. Sena stood up from her seat and headed towards the exit. The butler immediately rushed after her and stopped her. While they were arguing, the Duke suddenly spoke. He turned to Sena with an upset look, reminding her of her own phrase that as cellmates they were in the same boat. The girl was speechless. She did not know what to answer because these were really her words. The assistant was surprised by this behavior of his master. He asked him worriedly if he was feeling well. The Duke ordered Aaron to calm down. In the end, they settled on 600,000 rupees, but the girl was sure that everything was fine with Marcel. And the worst thing for her was that the Duke paid. She was worried about her home. Therefore, she turned sharply to the Duke and said that she would not sell the house. But Rashid did not understand what it was about. Then Sena clarified that she was talking about her house and that she would never sell it to the Duke. Hearing the Duke's answer that she should not sell it, the girl was speechless. The Duke repeated her words again and added that there was no need to worry about it. And when asked about the reason for such an act, he replied that he only wanted to make amends for his past offense. He also promised not to contact her again with a request to buy a house. The girl did not expect this. She could not believe that the Duke gave the money just like that. Having finished the conversation, Rashid asked and left. Then Sena realized that the Duke was just walking her home. Looking after the departing guy, she could not understand what it all meant. The next day, she woke up again from the noise. The sounds came right from under her windows. She went to the window to check. There was a crowd in front of Ellen's house. Seeing the police there, Sena became concerned for her neighbor. She immediately got ready and ran out of the house. She ran as fast as she could to get to Ellen as quickly as possible. But there were a lot of people near her house. They discussed that something terrible had happened. Then, in a panic, she grabbed one of the women and asked what happened in the flower shop. The woman replied that a thief had broken into the house. Suddenly, a frightened scream was heard, and someone said that there was blood. These words took the heroine's breath away. Someone was being carried on a stretcher, and there was indeed blood. Sena was terrified. She was already imagining the worst. The heroine ran up to the police who were carrying a stretcher, but she was immediately stopped. However, she pushed the policeman away and rushed forward. Approaching the stretcher, she pulled off the white fabric from the bottom. One of the policemen was lying on a stretcher with a wounded head. The girl was shocked because she was sure that Ellen was there. A little later, while she was drinking tea with Ellen, she laughed at her for a long time. Sena mumbled embarrassedly, justifying her worries. Then the neighbors said with a smile that she was safe and healthy. However, the heroine still did not understand what kind of commotion there was in the morning. Ellen said that the man on the stretcher was one of the police officers who came to her after she filed a complaint. But upon entering the house, he slipped on the water that the girl spilled and injured himself. And because he was displaced due to the fall that started this commotion, his face was covered. This utterly ridiculous situation seemed ridiculously absurd to the girl. Having finished her tea, Sena asked if they managed to catch the thief in the end. But unfortunately, Ellen replied that the thief managed to escape through the window before the police arrived. She said with a laugh that most likely the robbers ran away because they realized that she had nothing to steal. In any case, the heroine was glad that everything was fine with her neighbor. Ellen also said with a smile that she was lucky, as it would have been more dangerous if criminals had broken into her bedroom while she was sleeping. Suddenly, Sena wondered if this episode with the thieves was in the original story. Then she began to reflect on the development of the event if she then agreed to sell her house to the Duke. Sena suggested that in this case, when intruders broke into Ellen's house with the intention of stealing, it would have been enough for Ellen to scream at the top of her voice, and the Duke would have come running at that very second to save her. Then he could immediately win Ellen's heart. Sena imagined in all its colors the scene where the Duke saves Ellen with a gentle smile, and the girl looks at him with loving eyes. Having imagined this, the heroine was glad that she did not sell the house. Seeing the neighbor's worried face, Ellen thought that she was still worried about her and hastened to reassure her, saying that she was really fine, especially since she initially knew that this was not the safest area. Sena herself knew that it was a little gloomy there. Suddenly she realized that it was in the ill-fated areas that most incidents occur. In other words, this is an ideal location for placing the main character, since in such a place all sorts of troubles will always await her. Realizing this, she also realized that Ellen could be in danger if she continued to interfere with the main male characters. She was worried about whether Dion could protect Ellen alone. Suddenly, Helen gently grabbed Sena's hand and said with a sincere smile that she was glad that her neighbor was next to her. Sena was embarrassed by these words. Then Ellen added that other neighbors had previously come to visit her. It was a real happiness for her to be surrounded by such kind people. Hearing this, Sena felt relieved. However, she suddenly felt someone's presence and hurried to say goodbye to her neighbor to go check. Ellen was surprised by the suddenness. In order not to make her worry, Sena lied that she remembered something urgent, and that's why she was in such a hurry. Finally, she reminded the neighbor to always lock the door and left. Ellen said goodbye to her neighbor with a smile. After Sena left, Ellen continued to admire her kindness. Walking out the door, the heroine rushed after the suspicious man who was watching her and Ellen. The unknown person immediately noticed that they were chasing her and ran away. But Sena almost caught up with her and asked who he was. She sped up to grab it. Using her excellent skills, the girl managed to catch up with the stranger in one jump. She landed right in front of him. Sena easily tied up her pursuer. The criminal screamed that it hurt and tried with all his might to free himself from the grip. The girl demanded to answer the question of who he was. The guy shouted that it was him, but the girl did not understand who he was talking about and why he should pursue Ellen. Then the man said her name, Aaron. Sena did not immediately remember him. The assistant was extremely surprised by this, since they had only met yesterday. After these words, she began to remember something. Suddenly, she realized who it was. Realizing that it was the Duke's assistant, she jumped in surprise. Recognizing Aaron, she released him, and they went to the house the Duke had recently acquired, which was located not far from Ellen's house. Aaron was the first to speak. He hastened to explain himself, saying that he was not a stalker or a thief. Not knowing what to answer, she just smiled awkwardly. Then Aaron added that yesterday they were the ones who drove the thief away and alerted the police. Hearing this, the girl understood the reason why the robbers ran away so quickly. The Duke's assistant said that when they saw them, the criminals were very frightened and fled. He was incredibly proud of his master and himself. Then the girl, interrupting Aaron's heated speeches, pointed out that what the assistant presents as supervision and protection of Ellen is, in fact, nothing more than surveillance and stalking. To the girl's suggestion that the Duke was watching Ellen, the assistant frantically replied that his master was not that kind of person, and that Sena had misunderstood everything. Aaron tried his best to justify his master's actions, explaining that Lady Ellen was very important to the Duke, which is why he was trying to be there to protect her. However, the more the assistant jabbered in a panic, the more suspicious he seemed. In any case, Aaron was glad that the lady was safe and sound, but he was still sorry, since they did not have a very good view. That is why they did not immediately realize that a thief had broken into the house. Understanding what Aaron was getting at, Sena immediately made it clear that she was not going to sell her house, once again emphasizing that he will never sell. Having finished the conversation, the heroine said goodbye and left. Arriving home, she continued to wrap her head around the meeting with her assistant. Everything seemed too strange to her. In addition, during the story, the assistant often stuttered, which was also suspicious. After all, it is obvious that this is one of the signs of strong excitement. And besides, he never clarified who the Duke is to Ellen. Looking out the window, she curses all the strange men who are pursuing Ellen. From her house, not only Ellen's house, but also the Duke's house was clearly visible. He still had the light on, which meant he was forcing his men to stay up just to keep an eye on Ellen. Under such circumstances, it is difficult to believe that there are no ulterior motives here. Suddenly, there was a scream, and the lights in the Duke's house turned off. Hearing this, the girl became worried, as the voice was similar to Rashid's. She immediately grabbed her knife and rushed to help. No matter how suspicious the Duke's actions were, Sena could not simply ignore her cellmate who paid her debt. When the girl reached the house, she noticed that it had become quieter again. Although she thought that perhaps she had come running in vain, she still decided to check. Oddly enough, the door was open, and she easily got into the house. There was some kind of sweet aroma floating around. Suddenly, some sounds were heard again. This feeling was familiar to the heroine. She hurriedly began to look for something in her pockets. Taking out the device, she saw that the indicator was glowing red. However, remembering about the Duke, she put the device back in her pocket and hurried to look for him. Finally, she found him, but the Duke did not look like himself. He was squeezed in the corner of the room and shaking with fear. It was obvious that the man was not himself. He was having a panic attack, covering his ears. He tried to shield himself from extraneous sounds. His mind was in a fog. He muttered something, but his speech was incoherent and meaningless. Seeing this, Sena tried to adjust his feelings, but her attempts were unsuccessful. The Duke simply did not perceive the surrounding reality. Then she resorted to extreme measures. After her blow, Rashid finally came to his senses. At first, he was confused by the situation. Then he became furious. The girl is stunned to hear the guy's aggressive accusations that she didn't warn him that it was a haunted house. "I'll calm down a little." The guy continued to lament that if he had known about ghosts, he would never have stayed here completely alone. To diffuse the situation a little, the heroine tried to laugh it off and suggested looking for the source of the sound. But the Duke was still scared. He didn't want to deal with ghosts. Suddenly, the girl realized something. Seeing the guy's reaction, she realized that the Duke was afraid of ghosts. Blushing with embarrassment and anger, the man tried to refute these words. And the more he denied, the less convincing he looked. Then Sena again suggested that the Duke work together to find out what the source of the sound was. This idea made the Duke tremble, but in order to prove his courage, he agreed with a chalk-pale face. Having received a positive answer, Sena called the man to follow her. They walked together in the direction of the sound. Crossing an empty corridor, they reached some doors. While the Duke fearfully imagined what would happen behind these doors, the girl boldly opened the door. At this time, the man tried to calm down and collect his thoughts. Behind the door was an empty room. But the guy didn't see this, because the moment the girl opened the door, he turned away in panic. Noticing this, Sena decided to play a little joke. Realizing that there were no ghosts behind the door, the Duke finally opened his eyes. Realizing how terrible he looked from the outside, he began to clean himself up. Avoiding eye contact, the Duke suggests checking the other room, since this one is empty. Sena immediately agreed and went forward, walking ahead. She could barely contain her laughter, and still did not understand why the Duke did not order her to check everything alone and went with her, because it is obvious that he is afraid. Having reached the next room, the girl assumed that the sound was coming from there. Opening the door, they saw steps leading down. Then the Duke asked Sen in fear if she was really going to go down to the basement. The heroine decided to stop her mockery and invited him to wait here while she checked everything herself. but the man was against it. He was worried that there might be something scarier and more dangerous there than a ghost. Although his attempts to defend him while he himself was trembling with fear looked ridiculous, his gallantry deserved respect. Sena tried to calm him down, reminding him that she was a pretty strong hunter. But the Duke still believed that it was not safe to go alone. Toga Girl said that if something happens to her, he can have her house. The man was shocked by these words because he had never even thought about such a thing. The Duke did not understand the reason for such thoughts. Realizing that the man took these words too seriously, Sena laughingly said that it was just a joke. Despite the guy's anger, the heroine had her own reasons for such a joke. But the Duke was furious because everything has its time at the same time. This is exactly what the girl wanted, since in any case, being overcome with rage is better than shaking with fear. Whatever it was, the girl suggested that the guy wait, and she went to check the basement herself. The further she walked, the darker it became. The girl could no longer see anything. She was lucky because she had a mana stone. Having illuminated her path with a mana stone, she reached the door, but by that time the noise had already stopped. Noticing this, the Duke hastened to offer to return, since the sounds had stopped, which meant that now everything was in order. But Sena was adamant. She bravely walked forward, and the Duke followed behind, still trying to dissuade the girl from this idea. Sena was already annoyed by his constant persuasion. She abruptly pulled out her hand and angrily ordered to let herself go. The guy was confused and scared at the same time. Seeing such an expression on his lordship's face, Sena could not contain her laughter and began to laugh loudly. Looking at the Duke's red face, it was hard to believe that he was called a ferocious monster. Sena suddenly spoke with a serious tone. Looking straight into the man's eyes, she said that the thing below was not a ghost, and her phrase that it was a demon surprised the guy even more. Then, in order to prove her words, she showed him a device with a red stone in the center and explained that it reacts to demons. Putting the device back in her pocket, she continued, saying that the sweetish aroma that fills the whole house is also proof. After listening to the girl, the Duke asked her how the demon managed to cross the capital's barrier. Sena herself did not know the answer to this question, but she had certain thoughts about what kind of demon they were dealing with. But before they could reach the source of the sound, some force pushed the girl down the stairs. Rashid tried to catch her. He pulled the girl towards him to stop her fall. As a result, she dropped the mana stone. Also losing their balance, they both fell backwards. While the guy was worriedly asking if Sena was okay, she didn't even understand what had happened and why the Duke pulled her back so sharply. The girl looked at the guy with dumbfounded eyes, not understanding what was going on. Having come to her senses, she abruptly jumped up and asked what the Duke was doing. Then the man explained that even though there was a simple gust of wind from an unknown force, there was no point in it, because they were in a closed space with no windows. The girl did not pay attention to the Duke's concerns and moved on, deciding to start looking for her mana stone. The stone rolled into the basement and lay next to the golden-haired girl. As Sena got closer, she noticed that the girl looked like a creepy version of Ellen. At first glance, she realized that it could not be her neighbor. Following the heroine, the Duke also entered the basement, and when he saw the evil copy of the beautiful Ellen, he was terribly afraid. Sena immediately noticed a hint of fear on Rashid's face, and she couldn't miss such a great opportunity to mock the Duke. The heroine immediately turned on her acting talent and, pretending that her back hurt, asked the man to help lift the stone. From such a request, the guy turned even more pale. He wanted to refuse with every fiber of his soul, but because of the feeling of guilt, he could not say no. With shaking legs, he walked towards the mana stone. The girl was no longer able to hold back her laughter. She laughed on the sly. The Duke was so happy when he reached the stone that he did not even notice that something was floating in the air right above his head. Seeing this, the girl suddenly stopped laughing. Noticing this, the Duke became even more frightened and asked the heroine what had happened. Suddenly, this something approached the Duke and began asking the same question non-stop about why the man killed him. The unknown thing looked like a ghost in a black robe. Bloody red footprints appeared around, and suddenly a ghost with an eerie smile suddenly descended, as if trying to get to the Duke. Realizing that Karlmson was in a stupor, the girl called him to bring him out of his trance. Realizing that it was a demon, she immediately rushed to the Duke, but the men had already begun to have a panic attack. He trembled with chilling horror, not noticing anything around him. With a trembling voice, he repeated that it was Serena. The demon, with red eyes and a terribly scary expression, continued to rapidly approach. Looking at the ghost again, Sena noticed that she had the same eye color as the Duke. The demon inspired fear and panic. But the situation was also heated by the fact that the ceiling was on the verge of collapse. Sena tried to get the Duke out of there. As soon as they crossed the threshold, they both fell to the floor. At that same second, the ceiling collapsed. The Duke had already come to his senses a little, but he was still in a state of shock. Just outside the door, the demon, still in the guise of a creepy woman, hung on the gallows. Her sinister laughter echoed in the basement. From these sounds, the Duke fell into a stupor again. He repeated non-stop that he did not kill her. Coming closer, the girl put her hands on Rashid's shoulders and said in a calm voice that everything he sees now is unreal, a mere illusion, so he doesn't need to be afraid. Having made eye contact, she added with a smile that he just needed to close his eyes and wait a little. She would be back soon. The Duke was still not fully aware of reality. He remembered Serena, who was wearing a soft pink dress, and her long hair was flowing beautifully in the wind. Suddenly, the boundaries of reality and fiction were blurred. Thinking that the girl was still alive and continuing to call her, the Duke walked towards her. He walked with hesitant steps, but at the same time, he was glad that the girl was alive. He did not want to believe in her death. All this time, Serena never turned around. Suddenly, the amplitude of the movement of her hair became sharper, as if her hair was getting longer every second. Suddenly, she turned around, and the fairy tale world instantly collapsed. The girl with a creepy face and an ominous voice continued to blame the Duke for her death. The man continued to make excuses, repeating that it was not him. Unexpectedly, Sena returned with good news. She reported that she had caught a small demon, and once again explained that everything that the Duke had seen all this time was just an illusion. Stretching out her hand, she showed her prey, clarifying that it was an avilakas, a rather rare species of demon. She explained in detail exactly how these little pests operate and how they get nightmares from their victims and how they project them into the real world as an illusion. Remembering that these demons love to eat fingers most of all, the girl hurriedly began to check the Duke's hands. Sena also added that the incident with the wind was also just a trick of these small creatures. The stunned Duke asked only one question: how Sena managed to defeat the demon. The girl explained everything by saying that she is a hunter and specializes in demons that control the mind. The Duke still could not recover from the nightmare he had seen. Noticing his pale complexion and unnatural behavior, the concerned heroine asked Rashida if he was okay. Replying that everything was fine, the Duke tried to get up. Suddenly his face was right in front of Sena's nose. Only now did he notice the girl's kind smile. Only now realizing that the heroine was not so aggressive, but on the contrary, very kind and sweet, the Duke became embarrassed. Watching the Duke's reaction, Sena was perplexed, not understanding what he was thinking. However, since they had already caught the demon, the girl, standing up from the floor, offered to go back. With a charming smile, she told the guy to take her hand and stand up. The Duke was fascinated by her. He agreed and took Sena's hand. As morning came, the townspeople began to heatedly discuss something. Some of the neighbors heard loud noises. Some even thought it was an earthquake. But Sena hastened to calm them down, explaining that only the floor had caved in, and the reason for this was that the house was already old. This explanation suited the neighbors quite well. Hearing the rumors, a worried Ellen ran to the heroine to make sure she was okay. She was disheartened by the news that the floor had caved in. Sena told her the same thing as the rest of the neighbors, but suddenly Ellen's expression changed, and she asked in a serious tone what Sena was doing in his lordship's house. Trying to come up with something on the fly, the heroine replied that she was helping with the move. Hearing this, Ellen, with the same smile, said that she was glad to know that Sena was not hurt. Having finished the conversation with the heroine, she furtively glanced towards the Duke. Suddenly their eyes met. Noticing this, Ellen bowed and said goodbye to her neighbor and left. Finally, there was silence, and Sena breathed a sigh of relief. But before they had time to enjoy the peace, Aaron appeared out of nowhere, running with all his might towards his master. Concerned, he asked what happened and how. In order not to tell the whole story from the very beginning, the Duke only showed to study it, but the assistant did not understand what he was talking about. Then Rashid called Sena. The girl immediately understood what it was about and began to look for something in her pocket. She pulled out a small demon in the shape of a bee and handed it to Aaron. The Duke signaled to his assistant to take the demon away. Looking at the small thing in his hands, Aaron still had quite a few questions. But the Duke ordered him to return to the estate and study it, and also call a doctor. At first, Sena didn't understand why the doctor was needed. And when I understood, I was shocked. The Duke personally cleaned her wound. This made the girl feel awkward and grabbed the towels, saying that she could handle it herself. The Duke continued to stare at her. But for Sena, such burns were common when working with mana stones. After all, she is one of those who are not subject to magic. When a person uses magic with a stone, as soon as the mana runs out, the stone turns black. But Sena came up with his own way of using the mana stone. It causes the mana inside the stone to quickly leak out, and then uses it as an explosive. Dust usually rises after an explosion. However, the target can also be hit with one hit. This is a fairly effective way of hunting. Rubbing her hand, Sena continued to think about the recently captured demon, and the Duke watched her silently. Suddenly, he asked if this often happens to her, and the girl calmly replied that yes, since she is a hunter. But most of all, Rashida was surprised by the phrase that Sena no longer owed him anything, because he did not understand what kind of debt he was talking about. Then the girl explained that she was talking about the day when the Duke helped her get out of prison. Then the Duke agreed with a smile, thanking him for his salvation. He also added that from now on, the girl can count on his help. However, he was extremely surprised when he heard a request to share with her the information that Aaron would find. And although he promised to fulfill any request, this time he refused. He could not give the reason for the refusal, but in return he promised to fulfill any other request. The girl insisted on her own, arguing the need to obtain such information, but the Duke was adamant. However, Sena did not want to retreat, because a demon had appeared in the capital and it was natural to worry about this. But even this reason was not enough for Duke Carlman. Having received another refusal, the girl became seriously angry. Their conversation was interrupted by Aaron, who brought the doctor. However, as soon as he entered, he immediately noticed the overwhelming and tense atmosphere between the two. This made the assistant and doctor feel uncomfortable and awkward. They froze in place and did not know how to act in such circumstances. And when they heard the girl's angry cry that everything was fine, they jerked in fear. The Duke continued to maintain an imperturbable expression on his face, showing with all his appearance that further disputes had no meaning. Having finished the conversation, Sena still allowed the doctor to give herself first aid. On the way home, she continued to think and analyze what had happened over the past couple of days. In particular, she was haunted by thoughts of a demon who managed to cross the capital's barrier. Suddenly, she felt someone's presence right behind her. The heroine turned around sharply to check who it was, because the unknown person managed to get so close unnoticed. But before she even had time to react, the stranger grabbed her wounded arm, causing her pain. Suddenly, the unknown person asked with concern in his voice if the girl was okay. As it turned out, it was Dion. However, for some reason, when she saw him, the girl did not calm down, but rather felt some awkwardness. Scenes from that night flashed through my mind. At some point, she even turned pale from worry. Dion, not knowing the reason for such a reaction, became even more alarmed, thinking that she was wounded. The girl continued to think that now the man looks completely different. It was as if they were two different people. Having collected her thoughts, Sena answered with an awkward smile that it was just a small problem, but the answer did not satisfy the guy. He was still worried and questioned about the details. Then the heroine remembered that Dion was the son of the head of the guild and suggested that he might have heard something about demons. Taking advantage of the situation, she invited him to a conversation. They went to a restaurant to continue their conversation there. Sena showed with all her appearance how much she liked the food. Dion was pleased with this reaction. During lunch, they discussed the appearance of a demon in the capital. Unlike the Duke, Dion immediately agreed to share information if he found out anything. Looking at the guy's elegant behavior, Sena still couldn't understand what happened that night and whether that arrogant man was Dion. Suddenly, Dion started talking about the Duke. He asked Sena not to help Rashid anymore, or even better, to stay away from him. But the heroine could not promise such a thing because the Duke is her neighbor, and even before that, he helped her. She also said that the Duke was not so bad, and besides, his people helped Ellen when thieves broke into her house. However, this was the first time Dion had heard about the incident with the thief. Then Sena told him everything and added that there was nothing to worry about now because Ellen was fine. But suddenly Dion asked if she was okay. The heroine was surprised by such a question, because the thief broke into the neighbor's house and not hers, and answered that of course she was fine too. When the girl asked if he was going to visit Ellen, Dion replied that he was not sure yet. However, he looked worried. Sena interpreted this expression as concern for Ellen and was once again convinced of the authenticity of his feelings for Ellen. Continuing to live irritably, she thought that if all this was really a pretense, then he was a brilliant actor. Suddenly, the man's expression changed. He invited the girl to eat her portion, which he cut in advance since she had injured her hand. The girl gladly gobbled up the food on both cheeks and was touched by Dion's kindness. In the end, all that mattered to her was how the guy treated her, and it was okay even if he had another side.